It's the second most populous country in India's neighborhood, the one with whom we share our longest border, more than 4,000 kilometers of it. It's a densely packed country where anything that happens is unlikely to stay within. It affects India directly and indirectly. Bangladesh is heading towards polls next February. But before that, a lot is happening on the ground that's creating unrest in Delhi and elsewhere, around the country and beyond. Here to talk about it with us is our diplomatic editor, Jan Jacob. I'm Amitav Sanyal, opinion editor. You are watching A View on the World. So, Jayant, there have been 3 killings in recent times which have inflamed passions over there in Dhaka. It's so much so that there are people demonstrating against it in Delhi in front of the Bangladesh High Commission. One was a Hindu man, 27-year-old Hindu man who was there in the northern district of Mymensingh. The 2 others are student leaders, given that this whole situation of ouster of Hasina till the moment at least has been fronted by student leaders, if not been led by them. What does it mean?
So you're right, because 2 of the killings were of student leaders, and one was a lynching of a Hindu man in Bangladesh. So if you see what happened after the ouster of Sheikh Hasina in Bangladesh, there was an interim government in charge. But subsequently what happened was that usually when there is an interim government which is overseeing the governance before an election, there has to be a process of reconciliation, some kind of a resolution, some kind of guidelines. But things completely went out of interim government's hand. Because Muhammad Yunus, he has no major political background. He's a Nobel laureate. He is well appreciated in America, in Western capitals. He's in that sense, he had that acceptance outside. But the problem here is that the kind of democracy that the West talks about, that doesn't exist in Bangladesh. It's a very complex country. So if you look at the history of Bangladesh itself, whenever there was an election and a democratically elected government came to power, one of the objectives of that government was to finish off the opposition. Khalida Zia did it, Sheikh Hasina did it. So it's a very politically, lot of bipolar democracy, and at the same time a lot of retribution, vengeance, all that exists in the system. It's not a very straight democratic country as we understand it. And also adding to the complexity was the last 15-16 year rule of Sheikh Hasina, which was sort of an iron-fisted rule. A lot of apprehension about that. There is a lot of disagreement within the society. She was in power till she could hold on to power. After that, everything got unraveled. But like we started off, when an interim government is in power, they could have done certain things. At least law and order situation could have been brought back to normal. Nothing of that they could do.
Right.
Instead, they also became part of the system. And at the same time, a lot of things happen in Bangladesh, like this protest continue. Then you also could see, for example, the important section, for example, the important party which is Jamaat-e-Islami, which was sort of underground during Sheikh Hasina's regime, they came overground. So the political scene in Bangladesh got very complex and also very vitiated. Then in the middle of that came the killing of one student leader. Then arson started, violence started. So it had repercussions in many parts of Bangladesh. And they also targeted 2 of their largest newspapers, Pradhamalo and Daily Star, which never happened. So even 2 newspapers couldn't print in there. One is in 27-year-old history, one is on 35-year-old history.
They're both well respected beyond the borders people. Also.
But the protesters were alleging that they were pro-regime, and more than pro-regime, they were pro-India and pro-Hasina.
Right.
So that's the regime for them. So in that sense, it was a very complex situation, and the government of the day, which is the interim government, they couldn't control the things well. I think things went out of hand, and also it's a very volatile kind of a situation. Though they have announced an election, one of the biggest political parties in Bangladesh, which is Awami League, is not part of the process. So how fair and how good this election will be, representative this election will be in question. So it's a very complex situation now. Yeah.
As you said, because of the retributive politics earlier, a similar situation had played out earlier when BNP was not in the fray. either pushed out or they themselves opting out. This has been often the case, though it's never been a true democracy in the sense that we want a participative polity to be. Now let's just take a moment to note the attack on journalists. As you rightly said, these two papers have been attacked. Here we have reported that there are explicit death threats to journalists that have been given out. There is more. Journalism has never been safe, for a long time at least, has not been safe in Bangladesh, because even within, say, press clubs, we have seen pitched battles with bombs and all, involving bombs. Chittagong Press Club election. Given that, the news that is filtering out, given that extreme pressure on Bangladesh, is it something that we can rely on, or should we take it with a pinch of salt? The quality of news that is petering
But
out.
I think if you read the newspaper, it's quite fine. It's not a problem there. But the protesters allege that the journalists are the lapdogs of Hasina and India, so they have a problem there. So otherwise, if you look at the Daily Star and Pradhamal, as you know, they are very fair newspapers, good newspapers. They have very good journalists, and they have been doing a good job for a long time. So I don't think that's a problem, but in a very volatile, retributive kind of a protest, so either you are with us or against us. That is what is happening. And also this was very macabre sort of a kind attack. Like, for example, journalists were trapped inside the building when they set the buildings on fire. So this kind of thing never happened to this extent in Bangladesh.
So mobocracy rules even today.
Yeah.
So the students were used in the first instance, and they are being used even today.
It's more complex than that. For example, there was a genuine anger against Sheikh Hasina, which is
And
a
against
fact.
India also.
It's against India also. So Sheikh Hasina's case, if you look at the history of it, this student protest. There was this reservation giving to the freedom fighters, successors.
Right.
So this happened in 2018. There was massive protest. Then what happened? The regime withdrew that circular or order. Then it came through a backdoor entry in 2024 when the regime of Sheikh Hasina thought everything is stabilized, we can push with it.
But the judiciary didn't play along.
Yeah, the High Court did it. Technically. So at that time, if you look at the narratives which was giving out by Awami League, that was also like you are traitors, you are, that kind of a narrative was giving out. Like anybody who were not with us, or the children or grandchildren or great grandchildren of freedom fighters as they call them, then they were all seen as the enemy. The problem here is that who decides who were these freedom fighters? The allegation there was also like this. A lot of these freedom fighters' successors or the generation, they all were Awami League loyalists. So it was not a very fair system to begin with. Now also it's a country, as like you said, it's a very populous country. It's 170 billion people reside there. They don't have too many economic opportunities. Suddenly you see the youth, they are getting into a quota system, which they thought was very unfair. And
170 million, sorry.
170 million.
17 crore,
170 million. So what happened was that in the initial phase in 2018, they had the wisdom to withdraw it. But in 2024, they thought we can steamroll it. They can bulldoze their way through. But that didn't happen. So a lot of anger against Sheikh Hasina's regime, I believe, is very genuine. But the problem with all these kind of protests is that, like you said in the beginning, you are friended. Then all other elements come in. So you see whichever revolution or the protest or the street protest you see anywhere in the world, so there are all sorts of elements will join. So in this case, don't forget it's a very complex situation. So there are Jamaatis, there is interest, outside interest of countries like Pakistan, ISI. So it's a very complex kind of a situation.
Jamaat itself is said to be a handmaiden of ISI.
And that's what they
closely
say that. Yeah, but the thing is that they were also underground. But don't forget the fact that they have a huge presence in Bangladesh.
They've always had. They were never away.
They were never away. They were
Unlike
underground.
BNP, which was a political front, which was not in power, Jamaats.
No, and also if you look at some of these protesters, and many of them now argue that Jamaati should have a role in the political process of the country. So all that is getting very complex. But I think the first and foremost, whenever there is an interim government is in place, some sort of a resolution or a reconciliation take place. That hasn't happened. So Bangladesh doesn't have much of this history. Even if you look at the history of Bangladesh, so only once Sheikh Hasina and Khalida Zia came together, that was to oppose Ershad, the military dictator. But that time, I don't know what is the reason exactly. There was no retribution against Arshad. He lived a full life and he died, I think, in 2019. So nobody went after his life after that. The political process moved on. But again, in a retributive way. When one party comes to power, their primary objective is to finish off the opposition. The other party comes to power, they did exactly the same. So there was no two-way of an active democratic process.
There is one thing, though, as you said, that a lot has happened since the July-August revolution in Bangladesh. There was a commission set up by Mohammad Yunus, the chief advisor to the interim government, to bring everybody together to agree on the way forward. And that commission proposed a draft of changes that need to be done, including changes in the constitution, changing judiciary, changing laws, changing some ways of doing governance. 30 parties. So what happened in the interim and what was a bipolar polity, many other parties cropped up. Some were there, some were newly formed. They came to the table, they were brought to the table, 30 of them. They couldn't agree for the longest on this whole draft. They bickered. There were, by one report, there were 11 dissents to that multi-point agenda. 9 of them came from BNP and its allies. Finally, only 25 of them, as far as we know, have signed that thing. Now, that is also going to, that so-called July declaration, is also going for referendum, for vote, along with the national election on February 12th. So that will set the agenda for the new government, sort of give the path, set the path, because it has timelines. It has got within 2 years, this has to be done, that has to be done. Even if we say that, okay, we will work with any party that comes in power, that is New Delhi saying, and that anyway is the way forward for diplomacy. It will not be easy, given that the path will also be set by somewhat that framework that they have to work within. Isn't that so?
Yeah, I think there are 2 parts to this question. One is about the referendum. So whatever is they are going to have a referendum on, it sounds very good. Like they are talking about a bicameral parliament, talking about more representation for women, controlling the power, giving more power to the president, election of deputy speaker, and like the parliamentary standing committee kind of system. They want something like which India has, like many of the committees will be headed by the opposition. So all these look good. So in that way, I don't think that's a problem, because on the paper at least they all look good. Second, what is that who will come to power after the election? So you are starting on a very wrong note. Then there will also be people saying that are in the past also this is the same thing happened. The BNP boycotted election, Jamaatis were not part of it. Now Awami League, which is one of the largest political parties, is also not part of it. But one thing before the election is that Awami League has a lot of supporters who are still active. So the political instability, protest and violence will be there because they will be hitting the street, etc. So that is not a very good sign ahead of the election, number one. Number two, who comes to power and how India to deal with, how India will deal with them. So India doesn't have an option. No country has an option, because once there is a democratic election process internally, they elect whoever they want to elect, the electorate of Bangladesh, then you have to deal with them. Because it's whole of South Asia is like that. For example, you don't have much of a choice. So what happened in Maldives, for example, when the regime came and there was a president who ran an anti-India campaign, came to power, then he became a friend. So,
Sri Lanka.
In Sri Lanka. So, like, nobody thought that this Nayaga government will be so friendly with India, considering JVP's background and the ideological preferences, etc. But things are much better. So actually things went really well. In Bangladesh, there is a huge unraveling happening. So it will take time.
On the ground.
On the ground. Yeah. And also a lot of things were managed. Of course, you settle a boundary with the Bangladesh land boundary, the exchange of enclaves and things like that. That was a very good thing. But like you mentioned in the very beginning, it's around 4,096 meters boundary.
Kilometers long boundary.
Kilometers long boundary, which is, I think, is about 6 Bangladeshi division and 5 Indian states.
5 Indian states, yes.
Yeah, from Assam to Tripura. And so it's a huge tract of land.
It's one of the longest boundaries in the world.
It's the 5th largest land boundary in the world. Or
yes.
Something of that sort. So certainly within the 7th. So the problem here is that this land boundary issue, though you settle, the border has been a huge political issue there. Like a lot of killings, they say that people trying to move into India unnecessarily getting shot at. So this has been happening for a long time. So there were a lot of incidents in the past also. If you look at the history of last 25 years, there were many instances. A lot of that got managed because we had a friendly government in power in Bangladesh. That is one. Second, what is happening, Bangladesh is also changing ideologically. So all this talk about a secular polity, secular constitution, at least for the heck of it or the namesake of it, that existed after 71. That will get unraveled in this time. So it will be a completely new Bangladesh. They are not. They see Awami League getting a lot of support from India. So India is not on a great wicket to them. But at the same time, don't forget the fact that India is their closest big neighbor, and the ties are people to people, fraternal. There are a lot of, the relationship has a lot of commonalities. So I think once there is a government in power, if you are genuinely engaging with whoever is coming to power, which anyway you have to do it because there is no other option. So I think things can improve because in every relationship, and also don't forget the fact that you are such a huge country. So always a small country has this fear of a big country, they are going to, there is a huge, as you know, there is a narrative in Bangladesh, India created Bangladesh to control Bangladesh. There are people who even believe that. So all sorts of narratives are there, but also small countries always fear. The big countries, they are going to have
the
big brother kind of an attitude. But at the same time, look, a lot of medical people come for treatment in India, families.
Always.
So
one of the largest incoming set of
and also a lot of Indian students go and study medicine, for example, in Bangladesh. So that also happened. So I think once a new government comes to power, if there is a fair election, there is no major untoward incidents, and election takes place scheduled on February 12th, 2026, I think the next government is the best bet for India to stabilize the relationship. So there is, you have to shed also a lot of baggages. For example, it's a fact that Sheikh Hasina was very nice to India and Indian interest and everything, that is fine. But she's also a very unpopular leader. So if there is a new government in power, so you have two challenges. One, how to engage with this government. How far they will make Sheikh Hasina staying in India a huge issue. Will you be finding a way to get Sheikh Hasina out of India, or she would like to move to some other country to ensure that the relationship is steady? But all this we have to wait and see. But the best case scenario is that whoever comes to power, I think Indian officials have said it, Foreign Secretary has said it himself in public. So that is the only way you can.
So as a former Indian High Commissioner to Dhaka, Veena Sikri recently very eloquently put it, that being a friend means standing through thick and thin, and so Sheikh Hasina, we won't just turn over just like that, just because they're demanding. And she gave the very real example of the Dalai Lama. Absolutely. Now, when the Dalai Lama came over, along with a large retinue and continuing influx of people, China was in a different place, and Chinese populace thought about India was very different. Indian doctors had been in China. China had a warm relationship, people-to-people relationship. In this case, that is not so. As you just pointed out, there is a ferment on the ground. And a large part of it has to do with Sheikh Hasina being close to India. Border skirmishes, Teesta water sharing, all that has affected people. But mostly it's been the government saying, we want this. People really hadn't come up that way. Now that they're like that, along with Hasina, we know that thousands of Awami League ministers and workers are right now biding their time in Calcutta and Delhi, along with some Western capitals. Given that they are going to be here, is it going to be easy for India at all to remove that sort of anti-India feeling on the street level?
It depends on how the terms of engagement of these two governments. Like even if you have a huge political difference on the issue of Sheikh Hasina, so look, there is an extradition treaty. There are ways to deal with it. So you can say that there is an extradition is in process, assuming that she continues to stay in India. So anyway, it's a legal process. No extradition is taken place in such a short span of time unless you have such political interest. So you can circumvent all these kind of issues. And also there is a slight difference between Dalai Lama. One is a huge spiritual leader, so this is a political, this is a political hot potato as well. So I think it depends on the kind of power structure that comes in Bangladesh. Naturally, they will be more closer to Pakistan, which already there are indications for that. But I don't think China will be doing a lot of meddling in this. So because there is a relationship which is on the mend between India and China, so Chinese doesn't have much. Of course, they have their own strategic interest to look after. But anyway, even under Sheikh Hasina, it's not that Sheikh Hasina completely shied away from doing business with China. She had her own relationship with China as well. So all these small countries does that. When you have two countries, two big countries in the neighborhood, what will you do? You hedge.
Both sides.
Yeah. So everybody is free to do hedging. I think that is fine. But it all depends on the terms of engagement between this new government, which will come in Bangladesh after the elections on February 12th, and your terms of engagement. But how to diffuse the huge issue of Sheikh Hasina extradition. So it also depends on will that be the number one issue for the new government, or they will be looking at something else, stabilizing or having a new constitution, or that it all depends on that. Now, if it is a kind of a government which comes to power, which is very, and also don't forget it has become very neo-nationalist kind of a thing. So if it is a very kind of nationalist narrative that is running in Bangladesh, that is bad news for India. So their nationalist narrative is hinged on anti-India feeling. It's like a very anti-Hindu, anti-India. So narratives are also changing.
In a way, isn't it a mirror of what's happening in India? Nationalism, ultra-nationalism.
Nationalism is everywhere.
Pressure on minorities.
Yeah, that is the same way. Wherever the
because that conversation is happening on the streets of Dhaka, that we are doing what India is doing.
So majority nationalism, but India still has a better institution, elections, government change, because there is, like in so many elections happen in India, because transfer of power, which is more important in any democracy, is very
and plural.
Yeah, plural. So it's not like there is no, and also Bangladesh, unlike India, doesn't have many of institutions in place. So they didn't invest in institutions, and also nobody would put in a person just because he's a Nobel laureate to be an interim administrator. There are so many things.
So given that you hinted at the beginning, and you've come back to this point that Muhammad Yunus is a favorite of the American state, at least some players in the so-called deep state, and he was put in at their behest at some level. There is also the very real thought about, so this whole thing about foreign hand, you mentioned China and Pakistan, who are the main players in the immediate neighborhood. But apart from that, the US. There has been a conversation about US using St. Martin's Island, which is an island on the bay, which they had wanted. There was this weird, after being re-elected, Hasina said a white man wanted a piece of land for a base, and never elaborated beyond that, and that has been a cause for speculation for all that time. Now, this government has said, no, we are not giving US any base. But there has been some speculation, at least in some quarters, saying that they are covertly using that to approach some of the militias in the Arakan or Rakhine province of southern Myanmar. Now, is that something we should keep an eye on? Is that something there is something to worry about?
I don't think so, because this is, I think Sheikh Hasina conveniently overplayed this incident. Because, and also being close to the Americans is not the only reason why he is there, Muhammad Yunus. Because if you look at the acceptability, he's a Nobel
he has got the biggest organization on ground, Grameen.
On the ground, Grameen
Not just the bank,
then also he's a Nobel laureate. They don't have anyone else.
Absolutely.
So he has certain other acceptability. Only problem here comes is that he doesn't have the political tenacity to deal with a complex situation like this. So that's what my point was. And also the American, look, and nobody will give that kind of a base to an American with China and India in the neighborhood. Nobody is gone are those days. Like the Americans came, took over Ceylon radio, some stations. All these are part of folklore in South Asia. But the point is that in these days and times, it's not very easy, because geopolitics have changed, economies have changed, countries' power and the strength have changed. So I don't think Bangladesh would be doing something like that, whoever comes to power in that area, because that will be very contentious and other countries will oppose in the area, and also the Americans will not get themselves overly embroiled into an area where actually Chinese have a larger stake in a country like Myanmar. So, and also it's another messy country. It's not easy to deal with. It's perhaps in many ways it's like in Afghanistan or even more complex with all the stripes and things like that. So they will not even get to know to the depth of it. So of course they will have their own interest in the region, but I don't think that is the way Sheikh Hasina played it up, because I think there was quite a bit of hype over it, and St. Martin the Americans, it's good to build a narrative saying that I was thrown out by the big country outside and all that. More than that, I think there was a lot of anger against her. That is a fact. And what she did in last 16 hours, when all this happens with strong leaders, is that when it ruptures, so you'll see an eruption of all the pent-up feelings, anger, frustration, people looking for change, and all sorts of things come. And you look at all these revolutions or the change, the political vacuum gets filled up by all sorts of things. It's not like a ideal gas situation kind of a thing. So the vacuum is created, then whoever can fill in, they all walk in and get filled.
Politics doesn't like a polar vacuum. Yeah, it just comes in and claims the vacuum. Yeah, absolutely right. So you mean to say things will be likely to be on the boil between now and February 12th elections?
That's how it is.
And things will only be clearer about the future of our relationship with one of our most densely packed neighbors, the most densely packed neighbor, that is Bangladesh, only after that. Many other questions remain about Sheikh Hasina, about the future of the country's constitution and structure. As it rolls on, we will keep you updated. This was A View on the World. Thank you for watching.